Hey guys, this is Tripped Over, but today you can call me Maya Angelou. Now today we're going to be summarizing the book I Know Where the Caged Bird Sings by none other than myself, Maya Angelou. Now this story hits hard on some pretty great points, such as childhood innocence, sexuality, and obviously racial segregation. And one thing to keep in mind is if you've read this story, are reading it, or just listening to the summary, is that this story is written by Maya Angelou herself about her life growing up in the South. But beside that point, let's get to the story. The story starts off where Maya explains how she was raised in her grandma's store, who she calls Mama, in Stamps, Arkansas. And the early chapters basically explain that she was rejected and abandoned by her parents, her and her brother Bailey. Rejected and abandoned by their parents, and basically thrown on their grandma to raise them, which initially isn't a bad thing. Her grandmother teaches her great things, the ways of life, growing up in the South, and a lot of racial issues that she needs to be aware of. Now one day, when Maya is working in the store, her father comes to town. Now at this time, Maya is about 8 years old. Her father comes in, and she has no idea who her father was, and he offers to take her and her brother to her mother Vivian in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, when Maya gets there, she depicts her mother as this great, beautiful, alluring woman who she looks up to, but in reality, her mother isn't the best woman in the world. She works at a gambling parlor, and she lives with her boyfriend. Now, her boyfriend's name is Mr. Freeman. Not Morgan Freeman, not Gordon Freeman, Mr. Freeman. And one day, when Maya's mother, Vivian, is off at work, Maya goes and lays in bed with Mr. Freeman. And this is where the story starts getting a little bit dark. He doesn't molest her the first time. Maya lays there, and Mr. Freeman does things to himself. And Maya doesn't lie. Like, this is where the courage of Maya comes in, truth, to admit her feelings at the time. She says that this was the first time that she's ever felt loved and truly wanted, was when Mr. Freeman did this. The second time is when her mother is off at work again, just as she leaves, and Maya's getting ready for school. And this is when she's molested by Mr. Freeman. But I'm not going to go into too great details, because obviously it's not appropriate. And secondly, I don't believe people want to hear what happens. But pretty much, he molests her. And a young child like that, about 8 to 9, molested by Mr. Freeman, there's damage, is the best way to say that. And she endures basically the guilt and shame of having been sexually abused by Mr. Freeman. She goes to the hospital, and it's revealed to everyone that she was molested by him. And on trial, Mr. Freeman goes up there. Everything's all set out. Not too many details are said about what happens. The trial, he's found guilty, and he's sentenced to prison. Now the thing is, when Mr. Freeman's in jail, one of Vivian's family members goes out and kills Mr. Freeman. So not only does Maya now have the shame of having been sexually abused by him, but she takes on herself the guilt of Mr. Freeman's death, because she denied in court that he had molested her prior to the rape, and she feels that she's sort of being a mouthpiece for the devil. And this is when Maya takes a vow of silence. She stops speaking to everyone except her brother Bailey. Her mother's family basically accepts her silence at first as a post-rape trauma, but eventually they're just like, why don't you get over it? You're old enough, You need to get over this thing, which obviously isn't a manner to be taken lightly. But eventually the family becomes frustrated and angry at what they see Maya as being disrespectful, when in fact she's not. So they send, basically, Maya and Bailey back to their grandma and Stamps. And this is where Maya meets Mrs. Bertha Flowers. She's a kind young woman who gives Maya the will to live back, basically. She teaches her, she doesn't teach her to read, but she gives her the will to read. In a way, she sort of implants the will to educate herself. And this is where Maya really starts pushing herself. The vow of silence is done with her, and she sort of just resumes her life, her and Bailey both. And obviously Mrs. Flower starts giving her books under one condition. Now, it doesn't really play too much of a role because she doesn't break the one condition. It's basically the one condition is that she doesn't damage them and that she actually reads them. Years go by, and Maya becomes sort of aware of the fragility and the strength of her community. She starts going to church, and obviously she was, as her grandmother had her going before. But she attends them. It's mentioned a lot more that she's attending the church revivals, which the priests are preaching against white hypocrisy and sermons in church, and the strength in the sermons begin sort of to dissipate throughout the crowded homes. And people are basically partying, and they're not being exactly religious, to be honest. And Maya observes basically the whole community listening to. Now, this doesn't relate to the church part, obviously, but this is where, in a way, it was sort of like a personal win for the black community. It gave them strength, it gave them courage to stand up. Was listening to the Joe Louis heavyweight championship boxing match in which he defended his title against a white opponent. It was more of a community win, and how Maya witnessed that everyone came together for this one thing. And time progresses by, obviously not much happens. And then this is when Maya begins to encounter some events that teaches her about the nature of racism. And then at the age of 10, Maya takes a job for a white woman who calls Maya Mary. Maya doesn't say much. She doesn't complain about it. She just sees that the white woman is doing it for her own convenience. And one day, Maya has enough of this, and she retaliates by breaking all of the white woman's china. And not much said about that. The white woman has a freak attack, and the chapter ends where she's screaming after Maya. She says, "Maya, why would you do that?" And this is the first time that she's ever referred to Maya as Maya and not Mary. So in a way, Maya has that personal win that she showed her. She got her way. And eventually, the story progresses even more on this racial intolerance when Maya's in 8th grade. And she's not a bad student. She progresses along very well. And a white speaker devastates the proud community at her graduation by basically explaining to everyone that the black students are expected to become either athletes or servants, that is the only choice and way of life that they have. This angers Maya greatly. It angers everyone in the community. But the question is, at the time, what could they do? And another incident, I believe it's one of the final incidents of when this racial intolerance happens, is when Maya goes to get herself a root canal. She has a rotten tooth, and Mama takes her to the only dentist in Stamp, which is a white man. And he says to Maya's grandma, that he would rather put his hand in a dog's mouth than in a black woman's. Which, very insulting, as you can imagine. And Maya imagines that her grandma stands up against the white man, insults him, and that he agrees, but the full-hearted reality of it is her mama can't do anything. She's a black woman living in the 1930s, and not much can be done about it. But the final straw sort of happens when Bailey encounters a rotting, dead black man and witnesses a white man's satisfaction in seeing the body. Pretty much everyone's horrified by the incident, the black man dead, except for the white people in the community. And Mama begins to fear for the children's well-being and saves money to bring them to Vivian, who now lives in California. Another thing, a little side thing to put in, is during all of this, Bailey has been doing things with girls. One girl in particular, and he gets his heart broken by her. It's not too much of a major importance in the story. It's more of something just tossed out there, but it is a part of the story nonetheless. But continue on with the story. When Maya is 13, the family moves to live with Vivian in Los Angeles and then in Oakland, California. When Vivian marries Daddy Siddell, a positive father figure, this is basically the true father figure that Maya has ever had. They move to San Francisco, and this is where Maya truly begins to feel at home, that this is a place where, for once, she's happy. And she spends one summer with her father, Big Bailey, obviously, in Los Angeles, and has to put up with his crude and indifferent girlfriend, Dolores. And after Maya gets cut in a fight with Dolores, Maya just runs away. She lives for a month with a group of homeless teenagers in a junkyard, and not really much comes of it. Eventually, she returns to San Francisco, stronger and more well-assured of herself. She begins to defy racist hiring policies in wartime San Francisco, and she becomes the first black streetcar conductor at the age of 15. So Maya basically begins to progress along a lot more. She fights these racial intolerances, and she just starts to go farther in life. But the thing that happens is, at the age of 16, Maya begins to think to herself about her sexuality. She's like, well, I don't know if I'm lesbian, if I'm straight, unless I try. And this is, in a way, I have to give a little bit of criticism towards Maya Angelou, even though she's passed, but basically, Maya admits that she found basically a stranger, and she said to him, would you like to have sex? And he agrees. She has sex with the guy only one time, and she gets pregnant. She hides it from her mother and her stepfather for about 8 months, and she graduates from high school because she knew that if she admitted it to them, she wouldn't be able to graduate. And I mean, she hid it for 8 months, so you gotta give her that much. She was pretty good at it. Her parents just look over like, Maya, you're getting a little fat. She's like, oh well, it's life. But nonetheless, eventually, the story begins to end when Maya's laying down in her bed, and she hears her child whining. She goes, picks him up, and her grandmama comes over and says, you did do well, Maya. And it just ends where Maya begins to feel this confidence as a mother for her newborn son. And the story ends there. It's a pretty decent story. And you have to give Maya Angelou the credit that she was willing to accept all these things, and that she was willing to tell them to others. In the end, all you can ever do in life is just keep on living. I'll see you guys next time. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Boy!